Hello, everyone. This is Brian Hall at ServiceYour Alliance. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the power of storytelling. Before I hand things over to today's presenter, I just wanted to make a few notes. The first is, if at any time you have any comments or questions, please put them into the chat or the Q&A box, and we will take them as they come through. Sometimes I may wait because I know what's going to be coming down the presentation and keep it for later, or I might ask the presenter to answer in real time. So please leave any of your comments or questions there. Also, before we kind of go on to today's presentation, I just want to remind people what ServiceYour Alliance is. We have some new folks out there, and so we're a nonprofit working to make a year of service a common expectation and opportunity for all young Americans. We do this through many different strategies, from national recruitment campaigns to core member direct service benefits to helping programs create new, scale, or maybe increase quality. Our digital marketplace, serviceyour.org, for recruitment and finding opportunities and matches, and all of our policy and advocacy. Please check us out at about.serviceyour.org for more information. But today we're here for the webinar of the power of storytelling, and I would like to introduce my colleague, Laura Thompson, Regional Field Director at ServiceYour Alliance.
Thanks so much, Brian. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Brian mentioned, I'm Regional Field Director here at ServiceYour Alliance, and I've done a lot of work around storytelling trainings and really helping programs, alumni, and core members share their story of service. I served myself. I served for 2 years in Ecuador after college with a program called World Teach, which is run through Harvard University, where I spent 2 years teaching English and working with educators in a small city in the mountains of Ecuador. So I hope to bring some of that perspective to this webinar today. So this might be a little bit obvious, but we feel like we should really start from the beginning. When writing the story of your life, don't let anyone else hold the pen. Keep this in mind. Our brains are wired for stories. When we tell stories in organizing, around an issue, or around service years, we need to answer the question of why. They help us answer the question of, why do we care? Why does this work matter that we're doing? Stories help communicate our values and motivate people to take action. We use a framework called the public narrative, which is comprised of the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. Why do we feel so much more engaged when we hear a narrative about events? It's pretty simple. If we listen to a PowerPoint presentation with boring bullet points, certain parts in the brain get activated. Overall, it hits our language processing parts in the brain, where we decode words into meaning. And that's it. Nothing else happens. When we're being told a story, though, things can change dramatically, according to researchers. Not only are the language processing parts in our brain activated, but any other area in our brain that we would use when experiencing the events of the story are too. And it gets better. When we tell stories to others that have helped us shape our thinking and our way of life, we can have the same effect on them too. The brain of the person telling a story and listening to it can synchronize. Anything you've experienced, you can get others to experience the same, or at least get their brain areas active too. We think in narratives all day long, no matter if it's about buying groceries, if we think about work or a spouse at home. We make up short stories in our heads for every action and conversation. We're so busy searching for a similar experience in our brain to connect to someone else's experiences. And we can relate to their experiences of pain, joy, or disgust, etc. The idea is that stories really help us connect with others and activate these parts of our brain. So I'm sure many folks here on the webinar today have heard of David versus Goliath and this very famous biblical story. And as change makers, we often find ourselves in this David versus Goliath scenario, where we need to make up for resources we don't have with resourcefulness. We need to be smart and we need to be creative. We need to trust one another to act together, and we need to hope that change is in fact possible. We need to have this motivation, and we need to disrupt this idea of acting on autopilot. Why is this thing so important than something else? So this idea that that national service is this best kept secret, we don't want it to just remain a secret. We want to get the word out about national service. And to do that, the best way to do that is through our stories of service, our stories of our programs, and our alumni. What we're after is mindful, purposeful action, so action with intention. And action motivators are how we make people act. Action inhibitors keep us in this, oh, well, it's always been this way mentality. So an action motivator, an example of that, is this sense of urgency, an urgency of those need and opportunity. What is the urgency around the issue areas in which we serve and that our programs focus on? What is the problem that our program or our core members are trying to solve? And how can this sense of urgency help us solve that, to overcome inertia? Anger and outrage and dissonance happen when the world as it is in contrast to the way we think the world should be, when there's a sense of injustice. Hope is how we overcome fear. To be a realist is to recognize that sometimes the probable doesn't happen, but sometimes the impossible does. It's always probable that Goliath will win, but sometimes David does. And this sense of solidarity. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So if we act together rather than isolation, there's so much more that we can do. That's why a lot of us are part of this national service community. And finally, you can make a difference, yes you can, to overcome this sense of self-doubt. This is what stories do for us. And really the role of emotions play a big part in selling what you're doing and how it's making a difference. Why should we care about national service and demonstrate that our communities need these programs and that our elected officials and other leaders in our communities should hear this as well? Many stories follow a similar pattern. So we have this great example of Cinderella here. This is the hero's journey, a classic pattern of narrative identified by the American scholar Joseph Campbell that appears in drama, storytelling, myth, religious rituals, and psychological development. It describes the typical adventure of the hero, the person who goes out and achieves great deeds on behalf of the group, the tribe, or the civilization. And these are the different stages that the hero goes through, starting with the call to adventure and ending with this sense of resurrection and then returning with the elixir. Great stories follow this pattern. Just think of Disney. This is why it's so popular, because we love hearing this story and following the journey of this hero. We're going to end up giving this slide in our follow-up emails to this webinar, and you can really pause and go over each part of the journey to help you with your story development. So a simplified version of this Cinderella framework is called the challenge, the choice, and the outcome. Almost all stories have three very similar structural elements: the plot, the character, and the moral. What makes a story rather than just a recounting of an event is this challenge, choice, and outcome. A story comes alive with a challenge that confronts the character and demands they make a choice. And this choice yields an outcome. Stories teach us how to find the emotional resources, the values that are central to our lives. When we're able to identify with the protagonist, we feel their pain, their choice, We experience their challenge. We empathize with them. It's all because of these crazy mirror neurons in our brain. We can't help it. As I mentioned before, we use this idea of public narrative, the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. Public narrative empowers us to motivate people through stories. If you're going to call on people to lead, they have to understand what motivates you. Why are you here? What's your call to leadership? What values do you share with your community? The story of self communicates the values that have called you to leadership. The story of us communicates the values shared by those in action. And the story of now communicates an urgent call to action. Even more simply put, this is who I am, this is what we have in common, and this is what we're going to do about it. Telling your story of self is a way to communicate who you are, the choices that have shaped your identity, and the values that you hold that influence those choices. So what has called you to serve? Why are you called to leadership in that way? Why did you decide to tackle a specific injustice or problem? And what values move you to act? Have those values always been important to you? If not, when did that change? And how might these values inspire others to similar action? Think back across your life. What stories can you tell from your own life about specific people or events that would show, rather than tell, how you learned or acted on those values? We construct our stories around choice points, moments when we faced a challenge, we made a choice, we experienced an outcome, and we learned a lesson. You can ask yourself, when did I first care about being heard? When did I first experience injustice? When did I feel I had to act? And what did I do? A story of us expresses the values and shared experience of the community that you are motivating to act. It doesn't just highlight challenges, it also lifts up stories of success to give people hope. Marshall Ganz, who is a very famous organizer at Harvard University, says that hope is one of the most precious gifts we can give each other and the people we work with to make change. So what experiences have had the greatest impact on the community that you work with or the community that you are working to affect? What challenges has that community faced, and what change does the community hope for, and why? So this could be the community that you work with during your service year. This could be multiple communities that you work with as a program. Thinking generally about who are the people that I work with, who are the communities, and who am I looking to influence through my story? A story of now articulates the urgent challenge that you or us faces and the threat to your shared values that demand immediate action. In your story of now, you paint a picture of what the future looks like if we fail to act now, which is the nightmare, and what the future could be if we act together, the dream. For example, if our program or our core members and alumni do not tell their stories, then others won't be inspired to serve and know about the amazing work that these communities are doing. If we don't talk about national service and our work, then funding for national service may not continue. It's so important that we share these stories both with our communities, with other young people who we might inspire to serve, as well as our elected officials. Lastly, a story of now makes the bridge from story, why we should act, to strategy, how we can take action. Your story of now should end with a hard ask, a concrete way to take action. We are going to share a video that has been created by Service Year Alliance about a current core member and his story of service. What brought him there, his story of self, why it's so important to all of us, and why now. Keep in mind, this is a video that has been polished for a program by Service Year, but I think it's a great example of a story.
And this is Brian. We'll be sharing 2 links on the side. We tested out the audio earlier, and it's just better if you guys can watch it on your own. So we're going to mute. You'll see it playing on our screen, but I am sharing the links for this video, and we will show a second video that shows how you can do it yourself. And just reminding people of the whole point of today's webinar and Laura as an expert in helping others do this is really helping you all craft your story for program or core members and alums, helping you think through how you can start crafting your story and telling your story and the importance of doing that. So we're gonna, I'm gonna share the links right now, and we're gonna be watching the first video of Kenvin here on the screen. So if you wanna click on that video and get YouTube ready, we're gonna mute and watch it all together, but you'll have to do audio on your side. I apologize, there's a few people who had either couldn't see the YouTube link or having issues accessing that link. We will get you all these videos afterwards. And one of the things that I wanted to just take away for anybody who wasn't able to use those links is really going back to what Laura was talking about, which is the story that we tell of Kenvin and his experience at Literacy Lab really talks about himself in the narrative of the story, then us, what it means as a community, and then really what is the ending, what is the now, and what is he able to do. So we will be sending links out and, you know, really use kind of, as Laura put, the video is very polished. But if you really listen to the story that he's telling, that is a story that any core member, alum, and program could tell, even if you don't have the polished video, and that is really what today is about, is that storyline that all of us can create about our service. So we're going to go on to the second one, which is one of our colleagues John Gromick, who tape recorded himself, and this is to show our point that you don't need a flashy video sometimes, but sometimes you just need your storyline in telling your story. So if you want to click on the second link in the chat box, which is, goes to a Google Drive, we're going to play that one now and come back in 2 minutes. So this is Brian at Service Your Alliance. Hopefully you were able to listen to John's recording. I know that some folks, neither of these recordings were either working or audio was a little off. We will make sure that you get them post-webinar here. And for those of you who were able to watch them, again, John's is similar to Ken Bean's in that it tells the story of self, and then self in regards to the community and us, and then there's a now, there's an action at the end, which is the best way of storytelling and why we wanted to give the examples. We will, again, give these links post the webinar so that people can watch them offline and make sure that audio is working. And for people who can't view YouTube, we'll try to get you a different link for those so you can view those offline.
Great, thanks, Brian. So best practices for recording your own story. As you noticed, John recorded his on his computer. So you don't need to have any fancy video equipment to do this. You can even do it on your iPhone or whatever kind of smartphone you might have. So write out your story first, word for word, and practice, practice, practice. Make sure you're well lit when you're recording yourself. So sit in a place where the light is above you. And wear simple clothes. no patterns or crazy, crazy patterns and colors. Wear something simple and look at the camera. Make sure that you feel like you're talking to someone that's across from you by looking at your camera rather than looking down or up or to the side. We are going to be providing a pretty awesome worksheet, I think, on how to brainstorm and then write your story of self, us, and now after this webinar. We'll be sharing that in the follow-up email. And the worksheet really helps you think about your life and your experiences, your values, what you've done to bring you to the point you are now. What called you to service? What is an amazing experience you had in your service, whether it be an experience with a person or a particular moment in your service that had impact on you, and why do you continue to serve? Why is service still so important to you? So this worksheet really helps you work through those different aspects of iterating your story. Then record your video story after writing it out. It should be about 2 to 3 minutes in total. So that's with your story of self, your story of us, and your story of now. All together should be about 2 to 3 minutes. Upload your story to YouTube or another platform. Submit your story by emailing the link to resources@serviceyear.org with the subject Service Year Alliance Storytelling Webinar with your name, and we can really help give you pointers and feedback on your story. Include your phone number if you submit so that we can call and talk to you, or your email, whatever you're comfortable with, so that we can connect with you and help provide feedback and pointers. And make sure to also share your story with your program. It's only going to be heard and seen if you share it with others, and it's also a really awesome professional development experience and can help in finding a job later on. I think learning how to tell your story both to potential employers but also to friends, family, community is so important and can help us really share the story of national service and how it has such an impact on the young people that are serving, but also the communities that are being served.
Well, thank you, Laura. I mean, I hope that we do get some submissions through this. And I really want to, I have a few questions, but if there are any questions for Laura on today's webinar, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. But I really wanted to touch on kind of, it was in the submission, but 2 to 3 minutes. You know, I did service as well. I did Peace Corps, and Peace Corps teaches us, like, when you go home, don't, like, tell your family, friends, and everybody from, like, day 1 to day end, because people will lose interest. Like, really find, you know, what story is the most unique thread or one that's best. And so is 2 to 3 minutes, like, somebody's attention span?
Yeah, I would say so. So the story of self by itself should be about 90 seconds, and then the whole thing should add up to about 2 to 3 minutes. So exactly. I think holding someone's attention span, they always talk about elevator pitches and things like that. You really want to focus in your story. You don't want to try to talk about a million different topics at once, and you really want to try to hone in on that 2 to 3 minute mark. Yeah, I think in thinking about the topics that you're covering, you don't need to talk about everything. The worksheet will help you kind of brainstorm and think about what brought you to service and your values and where you came from, but hone in on one aspect of that in your story. For example, in my story of self, I talk a lot about this one woman, Rosa, who was a teacher in the town that I lived in Ecuador. She was an English teacher, but she was Ecuadorian. And my experience with her resonated through my service and even afterward. And caused me to kind of go into the career that I've gotten into. And so kind of focusing on one thing that people can resonate with and really can link throughout your story is so important, I think, and creating that focus. And you don't just need to have one story. You can have more than one story. You can have 4 different stories, but keep them sharp, keep them concise, and, you know, pull out your different stories when you feel like it's appropriate. It doesn't always have to be the same, but you should follow this format to help guide you.
So what you're saying is this is not a place where you put everything in the kitchen sink. This is like you decide to buy the refrigerator and focus on the refrigerator, and, you know, you couldn't have multiple stories. I know for Peace Corps, I came back and really honed 4 stories, you know, like that I would tell based off of the audience that I was in.
Exactly.
Seemed to work really well.
Exactly, yeah.
The last question, we're getting some questions in about, and some people have missed, after this webinar, everybody who is registered and participated will receive a debrief email that will include the presentation deck from today, the webinar link to view it again, the videos that we showed, the worksheet that we referred to, and it will also include mine and Laura's contact information. So after this webinar, if you have any more questions or you want to hone some ideas, you can always reach out to us. And we will also include the resources at serviceyear.org email so that you can submit. And Laura and I and several on Service Year Alliance will review anybody who submits to help give you some feedback or hone for your own storyline. The last question I kind of had, because, you know, Laura, for the audience to know, you've really been out in the field, you've helped programs, you've helped alums and Corps members tell their stories. What have you seen the impact when people do tell their stories? Like, because I can see myself, you know, having served, but sometimes I'm like, oh, there's enough people and people are telling their story, like, why should I tell mine? And like, what is the power of like an alum or Corps member telling their story for a program? What are those benefits, and like, why should Corps members and alums do that?
Absolutely. So I think there's a number of different benefits that I have seen being out there in the field. I think that it calls more attention to the program, and that's not just for, that would be for the community, but also for young people to even know what service is, that you can do with Service Year. There's a huge education gap out there. So many young people don't know that this is an opportunity, and by sharing your story, you can call others to serve. I think in addition to that, thinking about our local legislators, our elected officials in this country, we constantly hear over and over again here at Service Year Alliance that they want to hear from the people who have served. They want to hear those personal stories. And I actually recently worked with an elected official's office in New England. Because we did a storytelling event in that community where we had alumni sharing their stories of service, that elected official's office decided they wanted to create a video highlighting the stories of service in the state and how important national service is for the state. So things like that happen. And because of that, that elected official's office has now shared that video out across their network, and, you know, really called attention to why we should expand these programs, why they're so amazing. So I think there's so many different benefits to sharing. And I think also for professional development and sharing, whenever I share my story of service, honestly, I've used it in interviews in the past, and if you're thinking about what you're doing next after your service, this is a great way to be able to talk to people about your experience and show what you've done. So, so many benefits.
Yeah. That's great. And I know, you know, we hear from programs all the time, like wanting to get more videos from their Corps members and alums. So, you know, really wanted to ask that question because, I mean, it's a benefit, like you said, professional development for the Corps member and alum. And then also, you know, programs get really great stories and that they can use for a multitude of things, for helping, in the case of you referred to senators, but it can help with recruitment. It can help with getting, you know, a contact for that person, the person to see, oh, this is actually somebody who really served in this program, and I can see one of their storylines.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, great. I'm going to check to see in the chat and the Q&A if there are any other questions. But really, you know, please write your story. Again, we'll give you the worksheet after this in a debrief, and you'll receive all these materials again. Record your video, upload it to YouTube or another platform, and submit it to us. And when you're submitting to us, if you're a core member or alumni, I would also suggest that you submit it to your program too. This is a great way to include them on this narrative, and when we give the recording of this webinar, if your program was not able to attend, please share out. And for programs, after this, when you do get this recording, share out to your core members and alums. There is no time scale on the submission of your video or your story to us. This is kind of an open call, so people can watch this after this and still submit, and, you know, we'll still review and give some feedback. But yeah, I would say, like, as programs and alums, please include each other in this webinar so that, you know, your story can be told and used. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat box or Q&A. I want to thank Laura Thompson. She's done this workshop usually in person, so she was able to tailor this to a webinar. And really want to say, you know, our webinar series, we do one usually every month. We are skipping October based off of some timings and things. Our next one is coming up in November 14th. And its talent development starts with a service year. This webinar is really about highlighting how service years can be that workforce development and that pipeline. We're doing this this webinar in conjunction with the organization American Youth Policy Forum. And if you want to sign up for that workshop, you can go to serviceyear.org/webinars. And sign up for talent development starts with a service year. So before we get going, there was a question that came in here. What are some brainstorming techniques for creative video ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think if you're thinking about a video for your program, our communications and marketing team are experts at this. They're the ones that create all those awesome videos that we have, and we would be happy to connect you to the appropriate person on that team to help you brainstorm some creative video ideas. That is really their brainchild in their area. So would love to connect you, so please shoot Brian or myself an email. As Brian mentioned, we'll be following up with our email addresses after this webinar, and we would love to connect you to them.
Yeah, and this webinar was really set for how to tell your story, and I want to say, you know, video production can be really great, and we have done some great videos at Service Year Alliance, but really the video won't be good unless you have a great story, and stories can be done with good video, or as you see in John's case, can be done in kind of a low-key, just use your iPhone and have a great setting as well. So, but yeah, once we email back, if you would like to talk to any of our comms team, we can put you in contact with them. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time today. We will be sending out the debrief tomorrow. It takes us a little bit of time to get this uploaded into our system, but you'll receive that email tomorrow, and we look forward to getting some submissions after you all are able to look at our materials and see some of your videos. Thank you all for your time, and thank you for your service and everything that you do for your communities out there. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.